All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dig into a belief that's really deep-seated, an assumption that's at the heart of so many stories we tell about freedom and liberation. We're going to explore a really powerful argument against a tool of revolution that we often take for granted.
So, think about it. When you imagine fighting back against an occupier or a dictator, what pops into your head? For a lot of us, it's probably images of armed struggle, right? Guerrilla fighters, weapons. But what if that's not just the most destructive path, but maybe even the less effective one? Well, a fascinating source article makes exactly that case, and it really challenges how we look at this whole thing. So what we're going to do in this explainer is look at these two totally opposite methods. On one hand, you've got armed struggle, the classic story of fighting fire with fire. But on the other hand, there's nonviolent struggle, a strategy that the source argues is not only more ethical, but actually way more powerful. So let's get into it. Okay, so the article kicks off its argument by looking at the incredibly high price of violent conflict. And it's a cost that isn't just about strategy or territory, but about human beings. The first point the source makes is a really simple but powerful ethical one. It argues that the real cost of armed resistance is counted in people. Because once you let violence off the leash, it almost never stays where you want it to. And the article is crystal clear about who really pays that price. It's the innocent civilians who get caught in the middle. We're talking about kids, women, the elderly, people who aren't fighters but who are harmed the most. The argument here is that with modern weapons, the damage is so random and so widespread that it goes against basic humanitarian principles, and even religious ones. But beyond the human cost, the article brings up a huge strategic problem: the battle for the story, for the narrative. It says that in any conflict, the side that controls how the world sees things, well, they have a massive advantage. And here's how that works. The source explains that occupying powers usually control the media, so they can easily spin the story their way. They can make themselves look like the victims or the ones bringing stability. Any violent act by the resistance, even just one, can be blown up to label the entire movement as terrorist. And once that label sticks, it gives them the perfect excuse for crackdowns and for continuing the occupation, and it just dries up all the international support for the cause. So, if armed resistance is so expensive and so strategically tricky, what's the other option? This is where we get to the second part of the explainer, where the article really starts to build its case for nonviolent resistance. The article lays out a really compelling list of strategic pluses. I mean, besides the obvious that fewer people get hurt. Nonviolence just completely flips the script. When peaceful protesters are met with tanks and guns, it puts the occupiers' brutality on full display for the whole world. That's how you win that critical battle for sympathy. And think about it. Armed struggle needs soldiers, but nonviolent resistance, it empowers everybody. Students, doctors, factory workers, artists, the entire society can join it. And this is the key difference right here. Armed struggle can be spun as extremism, giving the occupier a reason to crack down. But nonviolent resistance does the exact opposite. It puts a huge spotlight on the occupier using way too much force against peaceful people. And that's an incredibly powerful way to get global support on your side and to isolate your opponent. Now, you might be thinking, okay, this all sounds great in theory, but does it actually work in the real world? Well, the article argues yes, absolutely. And it shares this incredible, often forgotten history of successful nonviolent movements, pulling a lot of examples right from the Islamic world to prove its point. The first example is just wow. It's a guy named Abdul Ghaffar Khan, also known as the Frontier Gandhi. In a part of the world we often associate with conflict, he got a stunning 100,000 unarmed Pashtuns to join him in a movement against British colonial rule. And the key thing the source points out is that his belief in nonviolence came mainly from his own reading of the Quran and Islamic principles, not from somewhere else. Okay, now let's jump over to Kosovo. When they were facing this really severe oppression under Milosevic, Kosovo Albanians, led by a man named Ibrahim Rogova, they didn't just protest. They built their own society right under the noses of their oppressors. I mean, they were turning homes and coffee shops into schools and medical clinics. It was this incredible creative act of nonviolent defiance that actually laid the foundation for their independence years later. And the examples just keep on coming. The source points to Egypt back in the early 20th century, where a huge campaign of nonviolent strikes and boycotts was the key to ending the British protectorate there. This wasn't just marching, it was a kind of economic resistance that led straight to self-rule. Then you've got Sudan in 1985. In this case, it was all about the power of people filling the streets. A massive, peaceful uprising just grew and grew until it successfully toppled the government of Ja'far Numeri. The source also looks at the very beginning of the 1979 Iranian Revolution. Now, before it went in other directions, its initial strength came from nonviolent actions, these huge marches and acts of civil disobedience that were powerful enough to bring down the Shah's regime. And we see this same pattern in Pakistan, which the source brings up twice. First, back in 1969, a popular movement forced a military ruler to step down. And then again in 2007, when a huge movement led by lawyers used peaceful protest to get the nation's chief justice put back in his job. And one more, the Maldives in 2008. Just through pure persistence, a widespread nonviolent movement managed to get rid of a dictator who'd been in power for 3 decades. 30 years of rule, ended by peaceful protest. It's amazing. And finally, the source brings up a really important case, the First Palestinian Intifada. Now, while it wasn't 100% nonviolent, the article really emphasizes its largely nonviolent nature. It was built on things like boycotting Israeli goods, refusing to pay taxes, strikes, and this incredible level of coordination between all kinds of community groups, from women's committees to religious leaders. So, after laying out the ethical problems, the strategic traps of violence, and this whole hidden history of nonviolent victories, we finally get to the source article's ultimate conclusion, its final, powerful argument. The author states it very directly, and this is a direct quote from the translation. The time has come to disbelieve in armed resistance. As long as we are unable to explicitly and clearly reject it, we will not be able to get out of the circle of violence and injustice. That's a really direct and unambiguous call to rethink everything. So, the final takeaway from the author is that the only way to really achieve justice and liberty is to make a fundamental change. It means we have to consciously reject the massive human cost of armed struggle and choose instead what the article shows is the proven, strategic, and ethical power of nonviolent resistance. So, what this all suggests is that nonviolence isn't just some passive hope. It's an active, disciplined, and historically successful strategy. And that leaves us with one last, really big question to think about. What does it truly take, in courage and unity and strategy, for a nonviolent movement to actually win against what looks like overwhelming force?